Getting old was so rare it made you the single most important person alive. Gray hair was basically a superpower. And what your ancestors did with the handful of old people they had will change the way you look at your own grandparents. Because we have this completely backwards. We treat aging as the tragedy. For them, aging was the prize, and almost nobody won it. Here is the lie you were told at school. Ancient humans died at 30. Life expectancy was 30, so everyone was gray by 20 and gone by 35. It is nonsense. That number is an average, and the average was dragged into the ground by babies. So many babies died. 1 in 3, in some places 1 in 2, gone before the age of 5. Stack a pile of children who died at 2 next to the grown-ups, average it out, and you land near 30. It never meant the adults kept dropping dead at 30. Survive childhood, and you could get genuinely old. 60, 70, sometimes more. The catch was surviving the infected cut, the hard winter, the bad birth, the fall, the fever, the animal with the big teeth. Life had 1,000 exits, and most people took one early. So reaching old age was not the plan. It was what happened to the toughest, the luckiest, and the most careful over and over for 50 years without a break. Which made the old almost impossibly rare. And rare in their world meant priceless. But to understand why, you have to forget everything a modern life has taught you about what an old person is even for. Picture a world with no writing. For nearly all of our story, that was every world. Nothing written down, no books, no records, no little glowing rectangle in your pocket that knows everything. So where did knowledge actually live? It lived inside people. And the longer someone had lived, the more of it they carried. The old woman by the fire was not decoration. She was the library. She was the only person still alive who remembered the great drought 40 years ago, and which dried-up riverbed still had water when everything else had turned to dust. She knew which berries were dinner and which ones would kill a child by morning. She remembered the winter the herds never came and exactly what her own mother did to keep everyone breathing until spring. She had seen it before. And in a dangerous world, the person who has seen it before is the most valuable person you have. So think about what gray hair actually meant back then, not something to dye and hide and feel a bit ashamed of. Gray hair was proof, living proof, written right there on your head that you had survived everything the world threw at you and were still standing. It meant you knew things. So the old were not shoved to the edge of the group. They were pulled into the middle of it. They were the judges who settled the fights before they turned into blood. They were the peacemakers. They decided when to move camp and when to stay. In a world with no police, no courts, and no books, a wise old head was the law, the library, and the map, all in one person. And that leads to the single strangest fact in this whole story, one that might explain why you are even capable of growing old at all. Here is something genuinely weird about our species. Human women live for decades after they can have children. Almost nothing else on Earth does this. Out of every species we know of, only a tiny handful, humans and a few whales like the orca, keep on living long after they stop breeding. Everything else breeds right up until the day it dies. But a human woman can stop having children in her 40s and then live another 30 or 40 years, sharp and strong. From a cold biological point of view, that looks like a glitch. A body still running with no way left to pass on its genes. It is not a glitch. It might be one of the reasons we took over the entire planet. Scientists call it the grandmother effect. A grandmother who has finished having her own babies pours everything she has into her grandchildren. She gathers food for them, she watches them while the mother is busy with the next one. And here's the detail that stops people cold. In groups studied today who still live the old way, the grandmothers, women in their 60s, often gather more food in a single day than the young mothers can because the mothers are stuck carrying babies. The old are not a drain on the group. They are out there, every day, quietly feeding the future. There is a real chance we live long past 40 for one reason only, because for hundreds of thousands of years, the old kept the young alive. So the old had a job, and it was the biggest job there was. But do not mistake any of this for a gentle life, because getting old back then was brutal, and the bones prove it. We dig up ancient skeletons and read a hard life straight off the bone. Teeth worn flat to the root because their food was full of grit from the grinding stones, and every meal sanded them down a little more. Joints ground raw with arthritis, spines bent from a lifetime of carrying. old injuries that healed at ugly angles and ached in the cold for the rest of their days. There was no ibuprofen, no hot bath, just the ache, the fire, and getting on with it. Take the Iceman, a man who died high in the Alps around 5,000 years ago, frozen and preserved almost perfectly. When scientists examined him, he was about 45, which back then made him an old man. His joints were worn, his arteries were already furring up, and his body was covered in dozens of small tattoos. Here's the strange part. Most of them sat right on top of his worn joints and his aching lower back. A lot of researchers now think they were not decoration at all. They think they were medicine, a Stone Age acupuncture scratched into the skin of a man whose body simply hurt. Even 5,000 years ago, we were trying anything to make the aching stop. And we have actually found these old survivors. In France, over 100 years ago, they dug up a Neanderthal, known ever since as the Old Man. He was riddled with arthritis, his spine was bent, and he had lost almost every tooth long before he died, so long before that the bone of his jaw had healed over the empty sockets. A toothless, crippled, aching old man in a brutal ice age who somehow lived on for years. And that is the part that should stop you, because he could not possibly have done it alone. You cannot chew tough meat with no teeth. So somebody softened his food, somebody kept him warm. His group carried him year after year when he could give them almost nothing back. And this is where the myth of the brutal, every man for himself past falls apart completely. We picture the deep past as merciless. The moment you were useless, you were left behind on the ice to die. And yes, in the very worst famines, when a starving group had to choose who ate, terrible choices were sometimes made, and we should not pretend otherwise. But it is not the main story the bones tell. Again and again, the main story is the opposite. The blind lived on for years. The crippled lived on for years. The toothless lived on for years. And that is only possible in a world where the strong carried the weak. For most of human history, the group did not throw its old away. It looked after them because it had not forgotten that the old had once looked after everyone. Which brings us to right now, and to something that has never happened before in the entire history of our species. In the last few years, we crossed a line no humans have ever crossed. There are now more people alive on Earth over the age of 65 than there are children under 5. Read that again. For 300,000 years, the old were the rarest people in the world. Now, for the first time ever, the old outnumber the babies. Aging has gone from a miracle almost nobody reached to something so ordinary we build entire towns just for it. So the next time getting older feels like something to dread, remember what it actually is. You will get old and it will be boring. That is the miracle. You will not be the rarest person in your world. You will not be the last living memory of a drought that nearly wiped everyone out. You will not have to earn your place at the fire by being completely irreplaceable. You will just get old, quietly, in a warm room, the way almost everyone gets to now. 100,000 years of your ancestors would have wept at the idea of it. A long, safe, boring old age, more or less guaranteed. The rarest prize their entire world had to offer, and it is handed to you today for absolutely nothing. For 300,000 years, reaching old age meant you were the toughest, luckiest, most important person in your entire world. Now it just means you were born recently. You get to grow old the easy way. And that more than anything your ancestors ever owned is the real measure of how lucky you are.